Hey, travel fam, it's Darian, and welcome back to I Need Travel Therapy. You guys, today is our national parks episode. Get excited. I'm excited. I love national parks. We're going to be talking to Karlee today, but before we get into that, please check out our Instagram and follow us if you are not already. We're going to be posting lots of Karlee's fun pictures from national parks, and any of the guests that we have coming on, we definitely want to be featuring them. A lot of the guests that we have are because they have great, Instagrams. We find them on Instagram. They're passionate about travel, and that's why we bring them on. So definitely be checking that out. A little about Karlee. She's a travel PT. She's currently in Juneau, Alaska. She's originally from Michigan. She travels alongside with her fiance, Ian, who is also a PT, so they're a travel PT pair. She has taken assignments in Arizona, California, and Alaska, and she spends a majority of her time road tripping and being outdoors, exploring extensive national park system through the United States. So we're going to talk to her all about that. Just as a heads up, guys, we had a little bit of issue with internet connectivity today, so there's a little bit of latency. So if we're talking over each other a little bit, forgive us on this one. It won't happen again. Anyway, let's get started with this episode. Hey, Karlee, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Darian. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. We wanted to talk about a couple different topics today, and we wanted to start off talking a little bit about your travel therapy journey because, again, following you on Instagram, we've gotten to see a lot of that and kind of get to be a part of it with you, which is exciting. So you started back in 2019, is that correct?
Yep. I graduated in 2019, and I started right away as a new grad.
Okay. And what were some of the main reasons that kind of drew you to travel therapy?
So there were a few reasons. I was always interested in travel, even going into PT school. I had heard about it, and I knew that was always something that I was really interested in. And then once I actually went into PT school, for one, PT school is pretty exhausting. I'm sure everyone who's a PT would agree with that.
I can imagine.
So the idea of going straight into a permanent job after that was it was really, really daunting. And also being from Michigan, there's at least 6, if not more, PT schools. So the market is just totally saturated, yes. And it's really hard to find a job. So my options opened way up with travel. So that was another reason that kind of drove me to it. Not just the travel aspect, but the market itself. And then just coming out of school, I have a lot of student loan debt. So travel affords me the opportunity to pay much more intensely into those than I would have been able to otherwise. So those are the main reasons that I decided to go into travel. But the more I talked about traveling, the more excited I got about it. The main reason was definitely just to see the country and just go out and do something different than Michigan, because that's where I've always lived. And I've never regretted it, not for a second.
Do you make it back home to Michigan very often, between assignments or holidays?
Yeah, I usually don't go home for holidays. My parents don't like that very much. But I usually, when I go home for a month. And it's usually in between contracts, or I went home last year for 3 months. So I go home at just very odd times, and usually I work through the holidays because there's a lot of opportunities during the holidays, like holiday pay and overtime and that kind of stuff, which is usually really beneficial.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you started traveling. Where did you originally go to when you first started traveling, when you're like, hey, let's do this?
Yeah. So I started talking to a recruiter maybe my second year in school. And I was just in constant contact with her about what the market was like and what she thought. So I ended up getting my first license in California because that's where the most jobs are. And I also travel with my fiance. So we're a team and we were new grads. So we were a little bit more limited. So I was in Stockton, California for my very first job.
Okay. So you kind of just managed, or you just landed in California just because it kind of worked out for you?
Yeah. Yep. It was just she's this is where the most jobs are. You're going to have the most opportunity and the most flexibility to pick where you go. And I think we interviewed for our first job. I think it was before we even knew that we passed the NPTE, which was really stressful because we were like, oh no, what if we don't pass? But we did, obviously, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we just, it was about a month ahead of time, which was really nice as a new grad. So we had plenty of time to kind of prep, and we drove out there, and then we started in like September or so.
And, California is one of those states that a lot of people go to as new grads or as pairs. It tends to be one of the best states for finding because there's just a lot of jobs available. But California license can be a little tricky. Did that take you a long time to do?
Totally, yeah. Luckily for us, since it was our very first license, it was a little bit easier, and it didn't take quite as long. But the process is really daunting, and they have just like a lot that you need to do. But at the time when we were applying, it was before we had taken the MPTE, because that's when you who you submit your MPTE through is your very first license. So it was a little bit easier, but it is one of the hardest licenses I think that I've gotten. Alaska is probably a close second, but California is pretty daunting of a license, but I don't really plan on getting rid of that license anytime soon because it is just such a lucrative place to have one.
Yeah, no, definitely. So you went to California and then you ended back up in Michigan. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what kind of brought you back to Michigan?
Yeah, so we didn't really decide to go back to Michigan. So we had our first job right out of school. That one was 3 months. We got offered an extension, but it was an okay job. It wasn't a great job. It was good for a new grad, but we were definitely ready to move on and do something different. So we came back home for a month over the holidays, and then we went back to California for our second job in Lompoc, California, which is just north of Santa Barbara. And we were there starting in January, and our contract was supposed to end in April. So the pandemic hit while we were there, and our contract ended up getting cut short, and we had contracts lined up in Hawaii that got canceled. So we were without a job in the middle of the pandemic with 6 months of experience. So we were kind of debating our options, and we lived in this amazing house. It was this dome house, so it was circular, and there were no rooms, and we lived on this beautiful farmhouse with views of the green rolling hills, and it was just amazing. So we really didn't want to leave, but we ended up deciding that that was the best option, which is good because we were unemployed for 3 months. So we packed up all our stuff and we road tripped across the country in mid-April. So we left, I think, right before or right after Easter. So it was right in the middle of when things were oh yeah, it's only going to be 2 weeks. No one really knew what was going to be happening.
Yeah,
so,
I remember that.
Yeah, that was a little crazy because everywhere we went, it was so different. So it was quite the experience.
And then, so you ended back up in Michigan. And then when you got to Michigan, did you guys stay with family, or what did you end up doing when you got back?
Yeah, so usually when we go home, we stay between our families. He lives on the west side of the state, and I live on the east side. So this time, we just really didn't want to do that because we had just been home for a month, and we love our families, but we like our space as well. So my family has a camper. Yeah. And they're we'll set up the camper for you. You can live there. And we're perfect. It's going to be spring and nice. And we can, ride our bikes and go kayaking and, look for jobs. So we decided to live in a camper. It was close to my parents' house, maybe 20 minutes away. They have a nice little area of property in the middle of the woods. So we lived there for almost 3 months. Not quite, probably 2.5 months.
Okay, so I heard that you had quite the experience in your camper. So could you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, so it was the end of May, I want to say, And it just was like raining and raining and raining, and we were in the camper overnight, and it's really loud on the tin roof. We're like, dang, that's a lot of rain. But, you know, we just kind of went to bed and didn't think much of it. And the next morning, I looked out the window and I was like, oh my God, this is so much water. And I opened the door and the water was up to our door. And I had like a few missed calls on my phone, and my parents are like, hey, is there any water there? Like, what's going on? So what had happened is we had gotten so much rain that two dams, well, one dam burst and the other one was overrun with water. And we lived in like the delta. So there was rivers here, and we were living in between. So we're like, well, crap, what do we do? How do we get out? Luckily, our car, our RAV was parked on a hill, so that was like totally safe, and a lot of our stuff was in there because we didn't like fully move into the camper. So we're like, okay, well, let's start bailing our stuff out. So we were carrying stuff on our head, like knee deep in water. I was a little more than knee deep, Ian was, because I'm a little shorter. So we were just like bailing our stuff out to the car, and we're like, how the heck are we gonna get out of here? We were wading through the water, so we lived kind of like back in our property, and we ended up looking up front towards the road, and the road was starting to wash away, and the water was just going over and over. So then I was like, okay, I gotta call my dad. My dad has a big truck. He should be able to come get us.
Yeah.
So I called my dad, and he's like, okay, I'm on my way. I'm leaving work early. I'll come get you guys. So he ended up coming to get us, and there was a lot of water, and he could barely come get us. So we were pretty lucky. And as we were driving out, we were just like driving with water rushing over the road, and the road started like crumbling and washing out, and there were cars and people just like had abandoned them. It was crazy. I had never seen anything like it. So we just had like all of our stuff in the RAV, and that was parked on a hill, hoping that the water didn't get that high because we didn't really know what to do. We took out like some of our important things like our ukulele and guitar and laptops and like brought that home, but everything else we're like, well, hopefully it's okay. So then we stayed with my parents for a few days, and it got really warm, and we came back, and there was still water, but most of it, we lived right by the bay, so, the Saginaw Bay, so most of it like washed out into the bay. Yeah. So luckily we were able to get all of our stuff, and luckily the camper was okay. It never ended up like going into it, but it was a crazy experience.
That is unbelievable. I feel like I would freak out. I feel like you sounded kind of like cool, calm, and collected. I would be like, full on. I can't believe it was like everybody too. You said you were driving around and like everybody was dealing with it. So a dam burst. That's crazy. I just can't imagine that happening.
Yeah,
was this wild. Like an area where floods happen, or was this like super abnormal?
So it usually floods there, but not like that. We haven't had a flood like that in like 500 years. It's been a long, long time. And we were actually really lucky. Wow. Where we were was not as bad as the city next to me in Midland, where the dam actually burst. So our dam just was overrun, but like whole houses were like wiped out in the other city. So we had a lot of perspective with that, which I think helped us remain calm, because we're like, well, it could be worse. We could be in Midland.
It could be worse. Perfect. Okay, so this situation happened. Then from there, did you decide that you guys were going to continue this camper life, or were you over it at that point?
So we were pretty over it because, well, first it was just like snowy and crappy, and it was just like not a nice Michigan spring, which of course it wasn't nice because we were there. I feel like we have the worst luck in terms of weather. And then we had mice in the camper, and then the flood happened, and we were like, okay, we should probably just stay with our parents a little bit. But my family also has a cabin in the Upper Peninsula right on the lake. So we went and lived there for like 3 weeks, which was awesome.
Yes, I've heard such good things. I've never been, but I definitely want to go. I'm from Minnesota, so I love lakes for sure.
Yeah.
So I've heard the UP's beautiful.
Yeah, you'll definitely have to check it out. It's my favorite place in Michigan.
Yeah. So all this happens and you guys are like stuck at home for a while. Are you guys continuously looking for positions, or are you kind of just waiting it out for COVID to kind of pass? That we thought at that point that it was going to pass quickly, right?
Yeah, so we were continually submitting for jobs. We submitted for hundreds of jobs. And before that, every job we submitted to and we got interviews for, we got right away. So that was very disheartening, like hundreds and hundreds of jobs, even one-person jobs, because we just wanted something. But yeah, so it was, I think probably we submitted for maybe 200 jobs before we finally, one of our recruiters, it's actually Med Travelers. Shout out to Med Travelers. We finally, there was like, hey, there's this team home health job. You know, it's in the Bay Area, California. If you don't have experience in home health, that's okay, which we didn't, but we really wanted to get some. And we got it, and a week later, we were in California again.
Yay. Yeah. That's exciting. Okay. So all this happens. But whilst the whole time, right, since you guys like love to travel and love to do stuff, something we really wanted to dig into was the national parks, because that's been like a big goal for you guys, right? And so while you guys were at home and then you start back up and travel, were you guys still going to see national parks at that point? Or were you kind of like coming up with this plan to go see all these national parks?
So we have this like big overarching plan to go to all the national parks, but we just kind of take them in waves.
Yeah.
So on the way home from California to Michigan, we had planned to go to like 3 of them because they were still open. But on the way out, they had ended up closing. So we weren't able to go to those. And then once we went back to California, we only had one left to go to in California, which was Redwoods. So we just kind of, as we go, we usually try to plan ones that are on our route or ones that will be nearby. But since we had such a quick turnaround, we didn't really have time to stop on the way out to California because we only had a week. So we didn't do any during that period. And then once we got to California, because we got there in early July, so a lot was still closed, and like Yosemite was only doing reservation systems. So it was a little more complicated to navigate because every single park had a different rule or a different setup in terms of what they were doing.
Yeah. And so you guys have been to a lot already, right? How many have you guys been to so far?
Yeah, we've been to 32 out of, I think it's now 64 because they just added one in West Virginia. They keep adding them, which makes it way harder to get to all of them.
But you're halfway there. How exciting is that?
It's very exciting. We love going to parks, like anything outdoors. And we've gotten to go to quite a few, and we kind of push it sometimes. So like when we were in California, we were living in the Bay Area, and we took a 4-day weekend and we drove 8 hours up to Crater Lake in Oregon because we hadn't been to that one. And it was totally worth it. It was amazing. But we're from the Midwest, and if you're from Minnesota, like you said, you know, we're like, oh, only a 14-hour drive. We can do that. No big deal.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Really quick, funny side story. Same thing. My mom has been wanting to take my nieces and nephew to this thing in Kentucky. It's like a replication of Noah's Ark, if you're familiar with that. So she's really been wanting to take my nieces and nephews. And so she left on Monday morning, drove 11 and a half hours down to Noah's Ark, went there on Tuesday, yesterday, and then on Wednesday is driving back 11 and a half hours with 3 children, 3, 5, and 7. So yes, I know what you mean being from the Midwest. Like driving is no problem.
That's hilarious.
Shout out to Mom. She's going to love this. She's been so excited for that. But yeah, as far as those driving trips go, I love driving. So 8 hours, no problem. I'm all over that. I love that. So now that you guys are like halfway, you've probably seen a lot of like the bigger ones or ones that I guess you said in California, maybe regional ones. What I guess is, as far as the ones that you've been to, do you have one that's been your favorite so far?
I always
Which
tell
is probably
people,
a hard question.
Yeah, I tell people I hate that question. And if you ask me today, my answer will be different than my answer tomorrow or the next day. Just because whenever I think about them in totally different ways because they are all so special in their own ways. I always tell people my very first park, which was the Great Smoky Mountains, has like such a special place in my heart. So if I have to pick like an all-time favorite, that one will probably always be my all-time favorite because it was my first one and it was the first time that I really was like, these are amazing. We have to go to all these parks. There are so many. And that's when I really started like learning about them.
So Smoky Mountains National Park, I kind of want to find out a little bit more about these because I personally haven't been there and it's been one that I've wanted to go to. So what's kind of the main draw with Smoky Mountains National Park? I'm guessing the mountains are probably a draw, but what do you do when you're in that national park?
So there is so much to do in that national park. There's a lot of camping and there's a lot of hiking and they have just like nature centers in general. And even if you're not into like nature and camping and hiking, the towns just outside of the Smoky Mountains have like so much different things. There's like a Ripley's there. There's like a little mini like theme park. So even if you don't like the mountains, just like being around them, I always tell people there's something about the Smoky Mountains that with like the fog and the green, it's so peaceful and almost eerie but calming at the same time. It's just like a really like serene place to be no matter what you're doing.
Okay. Is there a lot of wildlife there? Is that a part of it or is it
Yeah, there's quite a bit of wildlife. I've seen a lot of bears. There are a lot of black bears, which is really
so
cool. I think I saw my first black bear there. And then there's also this gorgeous scenic drive between, it's 500 miles between Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee and Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. And we've driven the entire thing. And there's like multiple stops and overlooks and places to camp. And the highest mountain east of the Mississippi, Mount Mitchell, is on that. And it's just like an amazing drive. And we went in like the end of April, early May, right after we graduated. And I think we saw like 8 bears and we saw like a mom with cubs in a tree. And it was just so cool.
In a tree?
Yeah, they were climbing a tree.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I didn't even know they could climb trees before that. And we were driving, we were with one of our friends. And I was like, guys, stop, there's a bear in a tree. And they thought I was crazy. And they finally stopped. And they're like, oh, bears can climb trees.
I would never have guessed that you could see it. You'd think they'd be too big and they'd break it.
Yeah, I know. And it was this little like twig of a tree and it was like moving to the side. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, that thing is going to snap.
I'm going to need to see pictures of this. This sounds great.
Yeah, I actually saw some just down the road from me here of mom and 3 cubs in a tree in Alaska as well.
That's so crazy. Okay, so this 500-mile drive between Smoky Mountains National Park and you said Shenandoah in Virginia? Okay, so when you're doing these national park trips and maybe making those drives, do you guys have certain campgrounds that you like to stay in? Like either a specific campground or I know there's like big brands like KTA, for example, that has campgrounds kind of all over the country. Do you guys have like specific places you like to look out for when you are camping, I'm guessing, in these national parks?
Yes and no. So we always, before we go to a park, we always research and look at the national park website. And they have a list of options and what's open and like what the campground is like. And then we always call the ranger and ask them, hey, this is when we're coming. This is what we're thinking about doing. Where should we stay? And also in terms of like the drives, there are, in the national forests, which are usually right around the parks, there are often like pull-offs that you can just camp at that are roadside camping, and they're free and they're primitive, so there's not like restrooms or anything, but there's usually fire pits and like sometimes if you're lucky you'll get a picnic table. One time we had a picnic table, swing, and a fire pit, which was cool. So they all vary, but if you call ahead of time, they always tell you like, hey, there's this in this area and you can check it out. So we usually don't stay at like campgrounds unless it's at a park. So we usually don't stay at like ones with like the COAs or the other one that you said. They're nice, but we just like a little bit more seclusion.
Okay. And so when you do these roadside ones, that sounds like it's probably just like a first come, first serve. But when you guys are in the parks, since again, you've gone to so many, do you normally reserve a spot, or how does that work for camping?
Yeah, so every park is a little different and every campground is a little different. Most you can reserve on reserveamerica.com. And if you have an annual pass as well, like a park pass, we have an America the Beautiful pass. It's a $80 pass for the year, and it gets you into all national parks, national forests. It gives you half off camping, which is really cool as well. And then it also gets you into some national monuments. So if you go to parks a lot, it's super worth it. So usually we reserve on Reserve America if they are reservable, but it'll say right on the National Park Service website. So if you type in like Smoky Mountain National Park into Google, one of the first websites should be the NPS site, and there's a little plan your visit tab. And right under that, it's like eating and sleeping, things to do, camping, all that kind of stuff. So usually we look at that first and get an idea, and then we call the ranger and be like, hey, this is what we're planning. And sometimes they're like, hey, that's a great idea. And other times they're like, no, you should definitely do this. And every time we've talked to a ranger, they have given us the best advice. And most of the time they tell you the areas like, hey, this is how you can get away from the crowd. And most people don't think to do that, but I tell everybody that goes, you have to call the ranger because they know the park better than anybody.
That's such great advice. I've never done that before. And I've done my fair share of camping, but the fact that they give you so much information, like I would feel like if I was making that call, like I would be bothering them or annoying them, but it sounds like they're like excited to share the info. So that's great to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you say like, this is our time frame, this is like what we're thinking, this is our skill level, they will, even if you have no idea what you're going to do and you tell them that, they'll be like, okay, here are your options. There's this, this, and this. And they're just a wonderful resource, and they are totally underutilized.
That's so awesome. I love that. I whenever I get the opportunity, I try to do walks with rangers. You know, sometimes at different national parks, they have things that they set up with rangers, but you learn so much more about like the land you're walking on and the significance of it rather than it just being beautiful, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important as well because it really helps you to respect the land you're on a lot more that way.
Okay. So specifically for Smoky Mountains National Park, that drive sounds beautiful. So I definitely think people should check that out. But as far as like, is there any specific hikes or like specific sites or like points of interest within Smoky Mountain National Park that people should make sure to check out if they're there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that drive is called Blue Ridge Parkway. And then my favorite hike in the park is Mount LeConte. It's a pretty long hike. It's like 10 miles, but it goes by a lone cave, which is really cool. And you just like walk up this mountain and there are just like beautiful waterfalls and streams along the way. And the view at the top is just amazing. And there's actually a little like lodge area at the top that you can hike up to. You can only get there by hiking and you can stay there. I've never stayed there, but it would be really, really cool to stay up there. I don't remember what it's called, but it's the only lodge in the park, so it's pretty easy to find. So that's by far my favorite hike. But for things like a little bit milder, Laurel Falls is a really easy hike. It's like 2 miles and it's a gorgeous waterfall. And that's like right off the road. It's pretty easy to find if you have a map. Always get a map also. That's another tip for the parks. It's easier to find your way that way.
Yeah.
And then there's a few others that I really like. Chimney Tops is a pretty hard hike, but it's only 4 miles, so it's pretty quick. That has a really nice view of the mountains. And then another really cool waterfall is Rainbow Falls, which is actually the first hike I did there. And it's just like a really tall waterfall. If you're there in the winter, Cliffman's Dome won't be open, but it is open in the summer. And you can drive right up to it, and it's like the highest point in the park. It's like an observation area. I've actually never been there, surprisingly, but I heard it's like one of the best spots in the park. It's just really busy, and I try to stay away from the crowds. So I've done a lot of hikes around that area, but I haven't actually hiked to that area.
Yeah. So that's a really good point you bring up. With it being like winter versus summer, have you been there in the winter, or would you say that this would be an okay, because it's a little farther south, right, being in Tennessee, would this be an okay park, although they'd miss that one hike, would this be an okay park for somebody that wants to go there in the winter or do like a winter trip there?
Yeah, absolutely. The first time I ever went there, it was early March, and it was still very much winter there. Like it wasn't as green in the trees, like there were still the pines and everything. But there's like nobody there in the winter, and you have a lot of the park to yourself, and you don't have to worry about bears as much. You still have to be, bear aware, but not nearly as much as in the spring or in the summer. And I always encourage people to go to parks in the off season because there are way less people there, and you just have way more options of things to do, and it's still just as beautiful in the winter as it is in the summer.
Yeah. Cool. I love that. And then another question I had, so for that 10-mile hike that you brought up, what was that one called again?
Mount LeConte.
Mount LeConte. Okay. So for somebody that wants to do that one, is that a pretty challenging hike? And then if you were going to do that 10-mile hike, would you like backpack in and camp, or is it like a loop of 10 miles, so 10 miles total till back to your car type of thing?
Yeah, so that is an out and back hike. So it's not a loop. So you go down the trail and back the same way. If you stay in the lodge, you have to like backpack your stuff out there. But I don't actually believe there is backcountry camping on that particular hike. In terms of the challenge, it's hard to really say because everybody's skill level is different. But in terms of like comparing it to the West Coast, it's not challenging at all because it's a very gradual hike, and that's one of my favorite things about the Smoky Mountains is all the hikes are very gradual and they kind of like wrap around the mountain rather than going like straight up the mountain. So I would say it's challenging, but you can go slow and take your time, and there's water refills at the top. So if you bring like a water pack, you can refill it. So it's a pretty, I would say, moderate level.
Okay. That's good to know for sure. Because it's always nice, like, when people hear this, I want them to be able to, decide, hey, is this going to make sense for us to go? And obviously people can look stuff up and talk about, the conditions at the time. But I love that. That was such good information about that. And I'm excited to go visit now. I know that there is another park that has like a piece of your heart that you've really enjoyed. So I wanted to talk to you about that one as well. And that's Sequoia National Park. So what would you say is kind of some of your favorite aspects of that national park?
So there's a lot of things about that park. That park is just very surreal and magical, and I'm very much a tree person and a plant person. I always say in another life I would be a botanist. Yeah. And the trees there, especially coming from the East Coast, the trees there are enormous. Like, it's just, you can't even put into words what those trees are like. And the first time I went in the winter. So the snow with like the red wood of the sequoia, the deep cinnamon color is just spectacular. And then the Sierra Mountains right by there are just, you have the view of the trees and you have the view of the mountains, and it's just like a really, really magical place to go.
So for somebody that hasn't seen Sequoia National Park and these redwoods, how big are they? Like, everyone knows they're big, but how big are they really?
They're huge. So, like, I put my arms around the tree and, like, I covered a quarter, if I was lucky, of the tree. They're just, like, massive. And the sequoias are a little bit different than the redwoods. They're really tall, but they're a lot thicker, which is really really cool. And they're a lot lighter of a red color. They're not like that deep mahogany. They're more of like the cinnamon kind of color. And they're just like, you can't put into words. I have a picture of me next to like 3 of them, and I look like an ant. It's crazy. Especially me, because I'm so short. So I think I like really show how big they are.
Okay, so my bad. I feel like I thought redwood trees were what was in Sequoia National Park. I know there's Redwood National Park and Sequoia National Park, but I didn't realize they were 2 separate trees.
Yeah,
I'm learning something today.
They're the same family. They're redwood trees, but they're different species of redwood. So the sequoia is different than the redwood up north, the coastal redwood. And then the only other place on the planet that has redwoods is actually, I believe it's either China or Mongolia. It's like that area in Asia. But other than that, there are no like family of redwood trees.
So cool. Okay. So when you go to Sequoia National Park, what are some of your favorite activities to do there?
Yeah, so Sequoia, even just like driving the park, you can drive all the way up into the mountains depending on the time of year. In the winter, you have to have chains. You can rent them at the visitor center though right away, which is nice. So just driving it is spectacular. But there's a couple of my favorite spots. And Sequoia and Kings Canyon are they're not the same park, but they're connected. So even their maps say Sequoia and Kings Canyon, because like part of Sequoia is just like a circle in the middle of Kings Canyon Park, and then they kind of intertwine. So they're very, very similar. So usually when I talk about them, I talk about them together. But Big Trees Trail is a trail in Sequoia that I believe it's mostly paved. It's a really easy trail. It's like a quarter of a mile, all flat. And you just walk among the sequoia trees. And it's just breathtaking to see them. And I feel like when I'm in them, I can't even speak. It's just so, like, it's like almost spiritual in there. There's just something about that forest that's just magical. So that's a really great trail. It's a pretty popular trail, but I feel like it's pretty easy to kind of get your space because it is such a big park. That's like one of my go-tos there. There's also, you have to go to the General Sherman tree. It's the biggest tree in the world. It's kind of funny though, because you look at it and you're like, well, that doesn't look much bigger than the other ones, but it's by volume, so it's really, really dense. So that's a really cool thing, to go and see the biggest tree in the world is pretty cool. So that's one of my favorites as well, and that's just like an easy paved path. You can walk right to it, and it's a really popular spot in the park. For seclusion, my favorite hike is the Redwood Mountain Grove. It's it's not very well known, and I heard about it from a ranger. And it's a hike. It's a fairly easy hike, if I remember correctly. I don't remember the mileage. I want to say around maybe 6, but there wasn't too much elevation. There was some, but it's, like a definite trail, but you walk right among redwoods as well. And I think it's the largest old growth redwood. It's the largest old growth redwood forest in the world still. So it's like that specific area. We saw 2 other people on that trail all day, and we spent hours out there. Like, it wasn't that long of a trail, but we would just like stop and sit and have a snack, and we brought our lunch out there. And so you start, it's like this kind of crappy dirt path to get out there. So I recommend 4-wheel drive if you go. But you drive like down into this like low area, and you start in the forest, and you're just like redwoods everywhere. And you just go through the forest, and like I said, we saw 2 people and we saw them right away and then didn't see anybody else. And then you meander like outside the forest, and it has gorgeous views of the Sierra Mountains. And so you get the mountains, you get the forest, you get seclusion. It's really, really magical in that spot. And
That's so fun. It's fun to see you, like, when you talk about it, you can tell that you just love national parks. You light up, and I think that makes it so much more exciting, right? Because you're just going to keep seeing these ones. And I think it's so special, like you said, to be able to find, like, some quiet and, like, just be able to be with nature in these national parks that are visited so frequently. So whenever you can find an opportunity to do that, I am a big believer in that, like, kind of taking that path less traveled. Maybe it's not like the biggest spot that everyone's going to see, but you get the opportunity to like really get to be with nature, which I think is, why we go to national parks, right?
Absolutely.
Something else that you brought up that I wanted to ask about is eating, right? Because if you want to go to a national park and enjoy it for the full day, right? Like maybe you need to plan food a little bit. So when you guys go to national parks, do you usually pack sandwiches for the day when you're doing these big hikes and things like that? Or is there usually places within the parks that you can eat something if you want to?
Yeah, most parks have places that you can eat, but they're pretty pricey because it's in the park. So we almost always pack peanut butter and jellies. Those are our go-tos. Peanut butter and jellies and granola bars are like what we packed on every single trip. We'd never really get tired of them. So those are definitely like our go-to things that we eat. But there's definitely options. We try to be pretty frugal on our trips. So we usually don't buy things at the park, but it is nice, and they usually have good food. So sometimes, we'll just want something warm and do that. And sometimes we have like a small backpacking stove, and we also have like a Coleman like stovetop grill, and sometimes we'll bring soups or beans, or we'll grill up veggie burgers or something like that. So we try to bring our stove and pack peanut butter and jellies.
Okay. And then is Sequoia National Park one of the national parks that you can stay inside of? And do you have any suggestions on if somebody wants to camp there, where they should camp?
Yeah. So in Sequoia National Park, I don't remember if there's camping actually in the park. I know in Kings Canyon, there's a bunch of backcountry camping that you can do. So we did one, it's called Mist Falls, and you hike out, and it's like this gorgeous canyon between the mountains. And there's just like tons of backcountry camping there, and you can camp anywhere as long as you're 100 feet off the trail and 100 feet from water. And most places are like that on their trails, but they're all a little bit different. I believe Sequoia, we actually camped outside of the park in the National Forest, in Sequoia National Forest. And there's like a bunch of those like roadside pull-offs. We camped right on, it's called the Kern River, and it's pretty far south of the park, but it's a really nice place to camp, and there's not that many people. And there's also really cool hot springs called Miracle Hot Springs out there that are right on the river, and they're amazing. So I'm not entirely sure about camping in the park for Sequoia, but I know there's a ton of backcountry, at least in Kings Canyon, that you can do. And right outside the park, when we went in the winter, there's a bunch of little lodges right outside the park that are really nice. They're like 20 minutes from the park, and we stayed in one of those, and it had a little restaurant at it, and they had like a bunch of dogs running around, and it was just like one of those cute little inns, So those are really nice too. There's a bunch of those right outside the park, especially in the winter, because it gets cold there.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's lots of options, which is good. Have you ever had that be an issue on any of the national parks that you've gone to where you haven't been able to find a place to camp?
We haven't really had that be an issue because we usually like have a spot set up before, but we have had times where we have like planned on doing first come first serve, and something happens where we just like don't get there at the time we want, because for first come first serve you have to get there pretty early, especially if you go in peak season, which oftentimes we try not to go in peak season. But when that happens, typically majority, not all, but majority of national forests, you can camp anywhere as long as you're 100 feet from the road. So you can literally park your car on the side of the road and just like go in the forest and find a spot to set up camp, which we have done before. So we always like have a backup option. I think that's a really important tip as well. Like have something you want to do, but have a backup option because things happen and it doesn't always work out. But national forests are a really good backup option because almost always you can disperse camp in them. It's very rare that they don't let you do that. And it's usually the rule is 100 feet from the road.
Okay. And then when you say the first come, first serve camping, get there early, are we talking like 10, 11 in the morning or like 3 or 4? Just to like give people an idea for if they're looking at doing that first come, first serve. I know that's hard.
It totally depends on where you're going, especially the big parks early, like 8 a.m. early. But some have a rule that you can only go in at certain times, like after this time. So they're all a little bit different. But I always tell people the earlier the better. And oftentimes we'll just go and we won't even set up camp, but we'll just like drop our stuff off and then go do whatever we're going to do. So we don't necessarily like put up our tent and set up everything. But we'll just like drop a couple chairs or whatever it may be so that we claim the spot. The earlier you can go, the better, always. But we've showed up sometimes at I think one time we showed up at a campsite and it was like 10 o'clock at night and we found a spot. So it totally varies, but you'll have better luck the earlier you go and you don't have to completely set up. You can totally just claim a site.
Okay. Okay, so there's another national park I want to ask you about, and I'm completely unfamiliar with it, so I'm really excited to hear about it. But and I know another one that was a favorite of yours is Channel Islands National Park. So can you tell us a little bit about Channel Islands and where that is and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so Channel Islands is a string of islands off the coast of Santa Barbara. I believe there are 5 islands, something like that. And you can go to any of the islands. We, in particular, went to Santa Cruz. It's one of the bigger ones. And it's not a very well-known park. It's very small, and it's on an island, so it's hard to get to, which is also one of the appeals of it, I think, because it's not busy. It just can't be because there's only so many. You have to take a ferry out there, or you have your own boat. If you have your own boat, you can also take it out there, because they have like a dock that you can stay at. So that's like one of the big things I really liked about it is that it was already limited in the amount of people that could go there. So we took a ferry it was actually out of Ventura, which is just south of Santa Barbara. And the ferry was kind of pricey. It was like $60 to $80 a person, but our camping was free out there. Okay. And on the way out, they stop a lot for wildlife. So we saw like hundreds of dolphins, bottlenose and Pacific white-sided dolphins, which I had never heard of before I was out there. And we saw a bunch of whales as well, which was very, very cool. And like a variety of different kinds. I don't even remember all the kinds that we saw. Because I'm not familiar with all of them, but I do remember we saw a blue whale because that's like the biggest mammal on earth. That was really cool to see one of those.
Yes.
It was a small one, but it was still really cool. And then we saw gray whales. And I remember the gray whales because they were mating when we saw them. So when gray whales, which sounds like kind of weird, but it's really cool. So when gray whales mate, they like go in this like rhythmic circle and they like breach the water over and over again. And it was like a very crazy thing. So they come out of the water a bunch, which you don't always get to see with whales. Sometimes you just see their blowhole, but they like came out and like fully breached over and over, which was awesome to see.
That's amazing. It sounds like a National Geographic episode. You should have had your camera out to send it in.
I know. I wish I would have at the time. I didn't, but it was so cool.
Okay, so they were breaching while they were, and then were you watching them? Were they eating and stuff too while they were there? Is that something they do? Because I know when they're in warmer weathers, that's when they feed, and then, during, I guess, what is that? Winter months. I don't know. I've got it backwards. But were they feeding there while you're there too?
So in winter months, they come up here to Alaska, and when they go down south, or no, I'm sorry, I have it backwards. They come up here in the summer because it's warmer up here in the summer in Alaska, and then in the winter, they go down south, and a lot of them go to have their babies there, and then they feed a lot there too to get the young ones strong for the journey back north. So there is a lot of feeding. So you see them a lot more in the winter months. We went in March, so it was kind of in between. Okay. So they were starting to head back north a little bit. And when they feed, they breach a lot more, or at least their blowholes come up a lot more, which is a pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah. Well, so you're saying $60 a person is a little bit spendier, which I totally get that. But people go whale watching trips and they spend, $150 a person, and you guys got that kind of packed into it, and then you got a campsite out of it. So that actually sounds super cool.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll stop for wildlife along the way. And so it is kind of like a whale watching tour all in one. And that's why I think it's just so worth it, because you do see so much. They don't just go straight out there. And they talk about the park a lot, and they point out different islands and what to expect, even though the boat that you're on typically goes just to one island. Sometimes they make multiple stops. It kind of depends.
Okay. And then, so when you're going out to the Channel Islands, you're on the ferry. Do you bring your car with you? And then how long does that drive take, or the boat ride take from California, the mainland California, to the island?
Yeah, so you don't take a car. It's just a passenger ferry. There are no roads on the island. There are some rangers with golf carts and that sort of thing, but it's very, very remote and primitive on the island. I want to say the trip, it's hard for me to remember, but I want to say it was a couple hours, maybe 2 hours. But we stopped a lot on the way. I think it was supposed to be a little bit shorter, but because we saw so much wildlife, they took time to kind of pause and take it in while we were there.
Okay. And it sounds like, if you're going to the Channel Islands and there's no roads on there, that makes it even almost more special, because it probably just makes it kind of all wilderness, which is awesome. So once you're there, do you guys set up camp? Because I'm guessing you'd stay overnight then, at least for a night or a couple nights. And then what is there to see and do once you're on the island?
Yeah, so you don't actually have to stay overnight on the island to go to the island. They do have round trip in the same day, and then they have camper options as well. So you can just go to the island for the day and hike around and then take the ferry out, but you have to be at the ferry. So if you do that, you have to make sure that your time is very managed, because if you're late, then you're stuck there, especially without gear. That would suck. So there's a bunch of hiking on the islands. They're all a little bit different, but we stayed on Santa Cruz Island, and there's a few different areas that you can go to. So one of the areas, it's the Scorpion area, was actually closed because they were redoing the dock when we were there. But we stayed at Del Norte Campground, which is spectacular. So that campground is free. It's first come, first serve, but it's not really a concern with backcountry. But I think they actually did change that now. I think you can reserve them, but they're still free. You just can reserve them ahead of time. So I think they did switch that since we've been there. But you hike, it was 3.5 miles or so, and you hike up to this cliff that overlooks the ocean and overlooks part of the island. And we were the only ones there. And it was it's a pretty hard hike. So 3.5 miles, you're oh, that won't be too bad. But you're going up and down and up and down. So it was pretty challenging with a pack. So I would encourage people to pack lighter than I did, because I was pretty tired at the end. But so we stayed up there the whole time. We wanted originally to hike to there one day and then to hike to Scorpion Campground another day, which is on the more southern side of the island, but it was closed because they were renovating the dock. So we had the Del Norte campground be our home base, and we just hiked out from there and did little trips kind of around the island, and it was very magical. And the way it's positioned, the Del Norte campground in particular, you can see a gorgeous sunset and a gorgeous sunrise, and you get both, which is just so cool, because you get like the sunset just over the edge of the island and you can kind of see the ocean from there. And then the sunrise is like all ocean and just a little bit of island. So they're a little different, but like equally as magical. It was really, really cool.
It sounds so cool. I want to go there now.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I love whales and wildlife, like for sure. And I love the idea that there's no roads there, that it's just like wilderness and you get to go and explore. It feels like, I just think that's so awesome. Especially it surprises me with Channel Islands, because it is just like Santa Barbara is a very popular area. So you'd think that it would be more traveled to, but obviously, it's very wilderness. So maybe, not everybody likes the same things, right?
Part of it. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, that it's very wilderness. And then also there's 5 islands. So like you get to choose where you go, which is pretty cool, because there's, I know Santa Cruz and I think it's Santa Rosa Island. Those 2 have camping, and the other ones you can just go for like the day. But there's a lot of people who go like diving and snorkeling right by the islands as well. I heard it's like world-class diving there. And you can like book tours and stuff for it. We weren't able to do that while we were there, but I heard that's just like an amazing place to do it. So there's a lot of different options, even if you just go for the day. So I'm really surprised, honestly, that it's not busier, like you said, being so close to Santa Barbara. But I think it's just not very well known.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so another question I want to ask you, for somebody that is going to hike in with all of their stuff. Like you said, it's like a challenging hike, and this could kind of work for anywhere that you'd go. But do you have any suggestions, again, food-wise, on stuff they should pack, especially if they're going to be there for several days, to try to help like minimize space and like not having to carry so much with water and everything?
Yeah, so in terms of that one in particular, we hiked out all our water. There is water at the dock, but you would have to hike back to get more water. So we just hiked out a lot of water. Usually what we do is we hike out like a couple liters, and then we have our life straw bottles, which are filtered. So you can just like fill them up in a stream and just drink straight from them. So we use that quite often when we're going backpacking. But in terms of food, like I said, peanut butter and jellies are like our favorite meals, so we eat those a lot. But the dehydrated foods are a really good thing to get. You can get them at most sporting goods stores. You can get them online, but they are a little pricier. So, but they're really light and just like small little packs. So we've done that. We've done packets of like mac and cheese, because we have a little camp stove, which is a really good investment. They're just, if you Google backpacking stove, you'll find hundreds of different kinds, but they're all pretty good. You just put like they're usually butane, and then the stove goes on top, and then it comes with like little pots and pans, and you can cook most anything in them. We do a lot of like beans, stuff like that. We try to get things that are really calorie dense when we go out there, just because then you don't have to bring as much. So we try to bring bigger meals like the dehydrated packs, or like peanut butter and jellies, or beans, or soups even. They're a little heavier, but sometimes it's a little worth it, just so you get that really calorie dense kind of stuff.
Okay. These are great tips. I'm excited. This is such great information, because, it's something that I want to do. I've never hiked out and camped with all my stuff, like bringing it out. I've always like driven and hiked during the day and things like that. So I'm excited about all these national parks you talked about. Is there anything that you do to kind of commemorate each national park that you go to?
Yeah. So we're big souvenir people. We have so many souvenirs. But I collect the maps at every national park. So there's like these glossy maps, and they like fold up really nice, but they also open up, and they have huge map of the park, and sometimes they have just like different info about the park and stuff. So I collect those. So those are only from things that are run by Department of Interior. So the National Park System is run by the Department of the Interior, but there are also some like national lake shores and national monuments and that sort of thing that also have glossy maps. So I have a lot of glossy maps because I collect them from anywhere that has them. And there's a couple like historic parks. Like I have one from Sitka here because it's a historic park. So they have a glossy map, even though they're not a national park. But yeah, we collect maps from national parks. We have some like stickers. We have a lot of stickers on our stuff. And we do, from our favorite parks, we have posters as well. So we have one from Sequoia, Channel Islands, and the Smoky. They have those like old school style posters that are like, I don't know, maybe like that big, that we have framed, and they're pretty cool.
That's awesome. Where do you even get those from? Do you get them like from the national park store?
Yeah,
you go
so
to these national
usually
parks?
they have a gift shop at all the national parks, and even Channel Islands, even though there's the islands, they have like a visitor center on shore, like right by the ferry. So usually it's the visitor center, but sometimes they'll have a separate gift shop as well. Sometimes there are stuff outside the parks, but I usually try to buy inside the park, even if it's a little pricier, because it helps support the park and to keep the park up and running.
Yeah. Okay. Such great advice. I love this. Do you have any places that are on your radar to visit next?
Yeah. So Monday we're going to Glacier Bay National Park, just north of where we're at now. So we're in Juneau currently. And it's in Gustavus, so we are, you can ferry out there, but we're taking a plane. So we leave Monday, and they have this really cool thing there that's a boat bed and breakfast deal. It's kind of pricey, but you get 2 nights stay at the Glacier Bay Lodge, and then you get a boat tour for 2, which is an 8-hour boat tour that goes to all the glaciers, and then you get breakfast every day as well. So that's a really, really cool thing that they do. So you can kind of do everything all in one. So we're going there Monday, and I'm super, super excited for that. And then they also have kayaking, which we're doing on Wednesday. And you can kayak, and it's called Bartlett Cove. And it's pretty intense kayaking, though, because it's sea kayaking. So they do this whole, I think it's like an hour of orientation, and you get like a tide map, and they teach you a lot of stuff about sea kayaking, which I've never been. So that'll be interesting to see what that's like. But I'm very excited for it.
Well, especially in Alaska, the waters are cold, so
totally.
You've got to know your stuff there.
Yeah, and then for our next job, we're going to Hawaii as well. So we are hoping to go to Hawaii volcanoes and Haleakala, hopefully at the end of this year.
Yay! It's so exciting. Okay. So is there anything we didn't cover as far as national parks that you want like people to know about national parks, people that maybe are interested in starting to visit more?
Yeah. Like I said, do your research before. Always talk to a ranger. Those are like the 2 biggest things that I cannot stress enough. And because also that will help you not go beyond your means. A lot of people come to parks and they don't really have experience in nature or with hiking, and they want to do the biggest, coolest thing. And that's how a lot of people get hurt. Because the parks, although they're very busy and they are, there's a lot of infrastructure there, there's also a lot of rugged wilderness there. And like I've been on a few hikes in Yosemite where we had to help do CPR because somebody went into cardiac arrest because they did a hike that was beyond their means. So I always tell people, make sure you're like prepared for what you do. Make sure you bring water and snacks, especially salty snacks. Those are really good for hiking. And always talk to a ranger because they will help make sure that you are doing things that are appropriate for your skill level. Because no matter what your skill level is in any park, there's something amazing to do. You know, you don't have to do the biggest, tallest hike in order to really experience the park, because oftentimes the smaller, more secluded things can be better in some ways. So those are like the biggest things. And then also make sure just not to pick, make sure you pick up after yourself and really respect the park, because if we don't, then we won't be able to go to the parks anymore. So it's really important to take care of them.
Such good advice. I'm so excited for all of your travels. Your next national park next week, you're going to be over the halfway mark. So this is awesome.
I know.
Everyone should follow you on Instagram and everything so they can follow your story. And we're so excited. We're going to keep in touch. But thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your experience and all of your knowledge with us. And you're amazing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had such a good time. Clearly, I could talk about parks and nature for hours, so I always love sharing my knowledge.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks for tuning in to I Need Travel Therapy. To learn more about today's episode, make sure to explore the show notes at medtravelers.com/I Need Travel Therapy. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a guest. If you're a therapist interested in traveling, visit medtravelers.com to explore nationwide travel therapy job offerings and to learn about the amazing benefits that Med Travelers has to offer. Also, a very special thanks to producer Jonathan Carey, assistant producers Katie Schraubin and Sam McKay, and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. See you next time, Travel Fam.